Welcome back, everybody. Derrick Soo, your 2022 Oakland mayoral candidate. Today I'm going to talk about path housing and costs. Here in Oakland, we have traditional housing by the hundreds of thousands. We have a current population of over 449,000 residents here in Oakland. And you're either in a standard home, standard single-family home. You could be in an apartment, you could be in a condo. So there's a lot of different types of traditional housing here in Oakland. Then when the homeless situation got out of hand and Libby decided to step in, she decided to use Tuff Sheds. The Tuff Sheds were cheap in her cost assessment. And we could have a whole bunch more. Actually, she had a whole bunch of them donated. The first round were all donated. So it literally cost the city no money. And each of these sheds had an approximate value between $3,000 and $4,200 each. They weren't finished out. They had a little bit of insulation, if you want to call it that. 3/8 inch thick insulation. I don't think it even had an R value of 6, meaning that it's pretty much useless. And the thing is that Tuff Sheds aren't meant for people to live in. Tuff Sheds are meant for lawnmowers and shovels and rakes and things like that. But Libby decided the homeless were about the same as a garden rake. So they went with the Tuff Sheds. Problem with the Tuff Sheds, Tuff Shed, the company itself, told Libby, these aren't for people to live in. They are a hazard. One of the chemicals used to preserve the wood, the sheet, the plywoods in the woods is formaldehyde. And we know formaldehyde is a carcinogen for cancer. So Libby is literally making people sick by forcing them to live inside of those community cabins. However, the community cabin, I did tell Libby and many others that we can actually make those safe if we finished out the interiors with sheetrock and actually laid down a vinyl floor, which is cheap and easy to put in, that blocks all of those outgas formaldehyde, because the wood is constantly always outgassing that carcinogen, which is formaldehyde. And you can't have people doing that. You're going to end up making them sick. They have respiratory issues, breathing issues, and here we are in the middle of COVID, and you're going to enhance that problem. So we have to have other alternatives. But the problem is, here in Oakland, the alternatives could take 10 to 15 years to get built. A single family home going through the standard Oakland building department and permits and everything can take anywhere from 5 years up to 10 years, or in like Jerry Brown's project, the 9th to Oak. That started in the 2000s. And here we are, they just opened up last year, the first building. So 19 years. So what I'm saying is not far from the truth. We're talking 5 years for a single family home in a permitted area. Everything goes right, and you have very little NIMBYism. Yeah, you're going to have NIMBYs rooting against you to build that house in that neighborhood even. So you're going to be stacked against those. And believe me, the NIMBYs are tough here in Oakland. So that's not feasible either, considering that we need to get at least 12,000 people off the streets. And the number that I use, I'm also including those that are ending up sofa surfing, and they're the hidden homeless. But they still need a home. And so we need that many units here in Oakland. How can we create that kind of housing in such a short amount of period? Well, step one in my path plan, if you've been following along, we've been leaving step one out, because right now that with COVID and cruise ships and everything, it's not exactly the right thing to talk about right now, but it is an alternative that we have to look at. And these cruise ships are incredible because they're all code compliant for housing. They have individual rooms with locks, so there's plenty of housing, and the housing opportunities for folks is really great. And here's why we need to get that. Number one, with the floating community, we can actually have paid for by the U.S. Census. There are 134 different programs and grants in the U.S. Census, and this PATH program with the cruise ships qualifies. So we can literally have a zero cost solution to the homeless situation, and also emergency housing. Should you lose your housing, the floating community is your safety net. It is Oakland's last safety net before you end up hitting the street. We're going to keep you safe. These are great units aboard the ships. We've already, before COVID hit, I've been talking about my floating community since 2017. And I've been actually involved in a lot of those projects, not here in the United States, but with ships overseas, and using them as housing. And how that first started was, it has its roots right here in the Bay Area. Remember back in October 1989, a little earthquake called the Loma Prieta hit. Well, in San Francisco, there were the Tenderloin district, there were so many old buildings that were damaged and red tagged by city officials that they needed to find 2,000 rooms, housing units for the homeless in the Tenderloin. And at the time, we had just wrapped up Fleet Week, and so the Navy was already packing up, leaving San Francisco, but they had still in the Embarcadero a transport troop ship. And that transport troop ship was used, it was offered by the United States Navy for temporary housing, and it ended up saving 2,000 folks from the Tenderloin. It gave them temporary housing until new replacement housing was either recreated or found. And so that's where the cruise ship came in originally. It was Art Agnos. Art Agnos, he was the mayor of San Francisco at the time. He did an incredible job with emergency housing for the city of San Francisco and the county of San Francisco. So we know this works. And it doesn't have to be expensive. The way that I have everything put together costs the city of Oakland for almost nothing other than the dockage. The waterway is maintained by Army Corps of Engineers, so the depth, we can redredge and reset the depth to the proper depth for these cruise ships. Setting up marshlands, setting up a swimming area. So we're setting up a whole new community. And this is Oakland's Middle Harbor is so underutilized right now. In fact, probably the only time that you even heard about Oakland Middle Harbor was just in these past protests for Black Lives Matter, because they did a protest right there in Middle Harbor, and also some of the COVID protests were going around Middle Harbor, because it's an open area that's not used a lot, but can hold a tremendous amount of people and cars and traffic. It's a beautiful area if you ever get out there. If you go back on my site, you'll actually see pictures of Oakland's Middle Harbor. It's a 101 acre open waterway that is for Oakland. It's part of our waterfront, and we just don't use that particular part of the waterfront. And the history on that site goes back to the war, and my dad worked there, MSC, Military Sea Lift Command. And what they did, they loaded ships with supplies. They loaded tankers and oilers with fuel for aircraft carriers, destroyers, everything. But they did not do ammo or any kind of weaponry or anything. So it's a safe site, and it's a good site. All it needs is to be re-dredged to the proper depth, because over the years there hasn't been any maintenance done because there's nothing going on there. It's literally a dead harbor. There's nothing going on whatsoever. There's so little sea life. You don't see sea lions. You really don't see much in the way of seagulls. You don't see fish. You don't see people fishing out there. So it's really, really underutilized, and we need to get that part of Oakland back, reclaim that part of Oakland, and by placing a couple of nice dockage, and we put some new ships in there, changes Oakland, changes the dynamics. We have affordable housing for all, and housing that anyone can access. Also, these cruise ships allow for businesses, because we're not buying the cruise ship. All we're doing, these cruise ship companies, the industry itself is struggling, as we all know, because of COVID, and they're just starting to get a couple of cruises going back in Europe, but here in America we just don't know when that might return yet. And so we have to take care of these things, and we need these cruise ships. The industry is looking for somewhere to park these ships, because it costs them a tremendous amount of money. They're billions of dollars floating right there that they've invested, and that they have a 30-year write-off or a 50-year write-off in some cases, because of the size of the ship and the anticipated lifespan of these ships. Typical lifespan is 100 years. That's the halt for seaworthiness. That's just seaworthiness. So we're not even putting them out to sea. They're just parked. No engines running, nothing. They're just parked. And so operation is very minimal for those ships. And all the industry, what we're asking from them is to provide the maintenance crews, the security for on board the ships. We need a management team over there that will work with our liaison from the city of Oakland. These are all cost cutting and cost savings to the city of Oakland, and we get folks off the street and housed safely and with stability, instead of what we're seeing here currently in Oakland. And then part two, once you're on the cruise ship, the cruise ship is not a permanent setting for you. That is not the goal. It is emergency housing. It is housing designed to be long-term if needed, but it's not dedicated just for long-term. This is actually, we want to help you get back on your feet quickly by having this as a respite from the economy outside. This gives you some breathing room, helps you get back on your feet by helping you with a career change, perhaps education, updates, things that you need. That's what this first part of PATH is. The floating community is your safety net. It's there, number one, to house you, number two, to get you back into society, number three, to get you permanently housed. That's PATH. And so once we have you with an income of $1,500, now we can move you to the next step on PATH, which is getting you housed. And that's the tiny home villages that we're working on right now. That's going to be a part of Oakland. It's already in our charter. We are allowed to put 2 tiny home villages in every district here in Oakland, and Oakland has 7 districts. So there's going to be all of that to start with. Plus we have the cruise ships. And we're going to be expanding the tiny home programs through the use of the City of Oakland Land Trust. Instead of having Oakland sell off properties that they gain through foreclosures and mortgage defaults, and a lot of different ways that Oakland does acquire property, real estate property, homes and businesses, there's abandonment. So there's a lot of ways that the City of Oakland gets hold of property. And in the past, what they normally do, they sell those properties as excess property. And the money that they receive from those sales go into the general fund to help float the city. And so what we're doing right now, instead of putting money into the general fund, we're helping people acquire home ownership. And how we get the home ownership is that we provide land leases. The land leases are going to be very low cost. There's a formula for recouping the land value so that the city is still getting the land value, but not losing. And so we stay in a positive territory in terms of on the books, because we actually have valuable real estate here throughout Oakland, and we acquire more on a regular basis, and then we expand that and allow more HOA tiny home villages. And with those tiny home villages, like I said in the past, number one, we help bring back school teachers. Number one, we got to have the school teachers because they're part of Oakland's future. They're teaching our Oakland future, and we need to dedicate a resource for the teachers so that they can stay here in Oakland and teach our future of Oakland. Then we have 4 medical personnel at the hospitals, the clinics, the doctors, the nurses, who may be new or struggling, from medical costs. Just going through medical school and you become a doctor doesn't mean that you're rich. I know a lot of doctors who are so struggling, and the most that they can do is afford an apartment, and they're never going to be stable by paying rent. And so we need to stabilize doctors, nurses, the medical personnel that we really need in the event of emergencies, and we need to have them close by. We want them in our community, not having to drive an hour to 2 hours in from outside so that they can work. So we want to bring those folks in. Then we have fire personnel and emergency personnel. And so right now, as far as the policing situation goes, I'm not going to speak on that because we have not started the actual conversation on what policing may or may not even be in the future. But we have to dedicate housing still to our fire and still support our emergency personnel. So right now the problem that we have with a majority of our emergency personnel is that they don't live in Oakland. They live, again, an hour to 2 hours away, and that's not acceptable, especially when an emergency arises, a big fire, a big riot, things like that. You need to have these people and individuals, these employees, living in the city and able to be at their station within 60 minutes. That's the goal. But here in Oakland, we don't have that because 80% of all of our emergency and fire personnel do not live in Oakland. They live outside of Oakland. And we need to change that. So those are things that PATH addresses. Also, what PATH addresses, we have one of those 6 ships dedicated for our folks coming out of incarceration. Anywhere in Alameda County, they have immediate housing. And why we're doing this is because what's happening right now, there are quite a few that end up coming out of incarceration and cannot go back to their family for one reason or another. And so they have to have housing. And if you're coming out of incarceration, number one, you don't have any income. Number two, you don't know the market. And three, there's virtually nobody out there who's going to give you a hand up to help you with your situation. And so PATH addresses that. PATH guarantees you a room, a home, a temporary home. And this isn't just, we're not treating it like jail. You've served your time. You are out of incarceration. You deserve full assistance to get you reassimilated right back into society. But we need to make sure to help you in such a way where you don't go back and fall back into the old habits. And so that's the purpose of this PATH program, just for those coming out of incarceration. We help you with educational needs to get you the education and the skills that you need to be successful in a work career, if you choose to go in a work career. For those that, we know how tough it is for those trying to find a job, and it's nearly impossible. And so that's why I'm bringing a mentorship program to help those individuals who really want to start a business, and you have the entrepreneurial spirit. And so all we have to do is help you direct it in a fashion that works for you, and that's legal. And so that's the mentoring program. And we don't want to keep you on the ship. We want you back in society. And so you also have access and a mentor for home ownership to help you buy a home here in Oakland's tiny home villages. So there's a lot of advantages to the PATH plan. It addresses so much here in Oakland. Also, with the floating community, we're not asking the cruise line to provide the businesses. These opportunities on the Oakland waterfront on all of these ships is incredible, because there's opportunities for bayside dining restaurants from a cruise ship. There's office space, there's retail space, there's opportunities for new recreational toys, bikes, water bikes, boats, canoes, kayaks, swimming, fishing opportunities. So there's a lot of really good things that happen in PATH and Oakland's Middle Harbor. One of the things that I noticed is that here, a lot of restaurants, the price of food, just eating out, is incredibly expensive. And that's because their overhead is so insane. If you knew what some of these restaurants were paying in terms of rent, it would blow your mind. Because I personally can't see how any of these restaurants can keep the doors open. And so that's where this comes in on PATH, because there's plenty of venue and business sites on board a ship. So there's a lot of restaurants, there's room for entertainment and theater, there's for nightclubs, there's discos, a lot of different opportunities on board these ships. So great opportunities for new businesses, great startups. One of the nice things that I'm including in PATH on the ship is not for the big chains to come in and rent up everything, because they can. In fact, they're banned from there. We don't want the big chains. PATH is the incubator for new business for Oakland. This is an exciting model because it cuts the cost of a space down to 1/3 of what it normally would be. So if you were paying $30,000 a month for that space, like it's pretty common here, you would only pay $10,000. So imagine the less stress every month that you have to come up with that amount of money just to cover a rent. Employees can be paid a better living wage. And the best part of all, you're not paying $100 for that plate in front of you. Yeah, it'd be nice to once again go out and feed a family of 4 for $40. Wouldn't that be incredible? That's what PATH offers here. And next week, what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about PATH for Business here in Oakland. Exciting program. I'm already talking to bankers, bank officials on this, and it's getting a lot of traction. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about PATH for Business on our next article. We'll be right back.